All right. So in today's lecture, we would be focusing on the Node.js part. So we would be covering on few of the theoretical parts first, and then we would be moving on to what exactly the code part looks like in Node.js. So first of all, let me make it very clear that Node.js is just a runtime, not tech stack or a language. So we would first burst some myths, some common myths throughout, and then we would move on to the code part. Okay. So if you guys can answer me, maybe just put it in the chat box. If what do you know about Node or NPM as a whole? Till then, I would just start with the lecture. So agenda for today's entire lecture would go somewhere around this lines. So we would be first discussing around what exactly JavaScript is, what the Node.js runtime has to give it to us, then different theoretical concepts which we would be taking into consideration throughout this next 50 minutes, and then we would get into the code part. So the life cycle of Node.js, how Node.js works under the hood, all these things were taken into consideration. Uh, because this particular lecture we would be focusing onto the theory part more rather than focusing onto the practical implementation of it. So we would not be making a API out of it, but we would learning how Node.js runs under the hood. Okay, so I guess you guys are with me till now. So moving forward, first of all, so JavaScript was meant to be work or meant to be or designed in a way that it is to be used in a particular browser. So right now we have browsers like Chrome, we have Mozilla Firefox, we have Microsoft Edge. Internet Explorer was one, now they have closed it. But yeah, so these browsers basically use some runtime engines, out of which one was a browser. One was, just a minute, someone just, yeah. Okay, so hi Yash. Okay, so what I was talking about that these browsers like Chrome, Microsoft Edge, and Mozilla Firefox did have some of these runtime engines. So some wise person, some wise man took the engine out of this Chrome and placed it into a different environment which we now call as Node.js. So we have this V8 engine which was used previously by Chrome as its primary engine to interpret JavaScript. Okay, so before we move forward, I would like to now have this particular theoretical concept first covered. Okay, so first of all, what is the difference between the browser JS and the Node.js? So if you're not comfortable or you having doubts, you can just ask me throughout the time, throughout the next 50 minutes. Okay, so yeah, so first of all, we have something called as DOM. So DOM is document object model. So I would just open any random website and then show you out how what exactly it looks like. Okay, so I guess I might open YouTube for the sake of simplicity now. And now, if I want to show you, if I go to inspect and then I have some random code out here. So this is basically DOM. Okay, so each and every element inside the browser or inside any website is basically having DOM. DOM is the basically building block of any website. Okay, so what JavaScript had in the browser was DOM, and what now Node has is some APIs. So APIs in this sense are some callback functions to the kernel of the operating system. Okay, we'll also come back to what these operating systems looks like, what these modules looks like. And next we had some parameters of import, export, some require parameters. If you guys have ever worked with React uh, before or previously, you would be knowing that you used something called as import statements, right? So we used to have some import and then we had some component, let's say C1, and from, let's say, bootstrap, right? We do use these kind of dependencies throughout, right? So this is something which is called as ECMAScript, and the require module is through the module dependencies. So what we had right now or previously was that the JavaScript which we used in browser had these import module syntax, and the Node.js had this require module syntax. So Node.js basically works in the modular structure. Next comes the introduction to the dynamic and interpreted language. Okay, so JavaScript under the hood is a dynamic or interpreted language. What do you mean when I say dynamic? It's basically that we need not have or need not store the data type inside JavaScript. Let's say now I want to declare a variable, let's say first name. Okay, so I would declare it something like that. Let my first name be Google. Okay, so this is how it works. Instead, if it was C++ or Java, we had to maybe use something like string and then my first name and so on and so. Okay, so this is the difference between dynamic and statical type language, wherein JavaScript can change the type of data type which it stores in a particular variable. So let's say now I want to change this particular type to number. I want to maybe assign first name to a number. I can easily do it in Node.js, right? Because it works with JavaScript. Next is the interpreted language. Okay, so if you guys know, there is something called as a compiler. Okay, so what the exact work of this compiler is that it basically takes the source code and it changes or basically compiles it down to something called as a executable file or dot executable. We have some jar files and all these files. So in Java we also have this compile time language reference, and in C++ also the system works similar. But what different is in JavaScript is that we use a interpreter. So in case of this compiler, how this JavaScript code works is that we have the source code, we have an interpreter. Okay, and this interpreter basically directly executes the code. So we need not have an executable file which then again is being executed by some other executables, and then the entire output of this file is generated. So JavaScript basically turns this source code directly into the execution part, and this makes JavaScript slow as compared to the other compiled languages, because every time the JavaScript runs we have to, or the interpreter has to convert that code to the executable and execute it. Okay, so it does not convert exactly, but it interprets. This is the difference between interpretable code and compiler code. So basically JavaScript is comparatively slow in this case. Okay, but when Node was made popular and all these things happened, JavaScript was introduced with something called a JIT, which is just in time. So what it does is basically whatever hot module codes we have. Now let's say we have a code which usually calls a function. Let's say add number. Okay, and it calls this particular function 15 times, 20 times, or maybe 1 lakh times. So what this JIT does is basically under the hood store this, not store this or cache this particular function somewhere, and every time we, or the main code calls, or the top level codes call this function, this particular cached code or cached executables are again called back. So with this or some multiple more optimizations, JavaScript engines are being modified day by day. So this is how these JIT compilers are working under the hood to give the best out of their compile times, because we don't have a compile setting right there in the between. Obviously this brings in multiple errors, multiple platform dependencies and all these things. But yeah, why first of all Node.js was developed? Because first of all, because of the ease of development. So all the browser functionalities, those are developed in JavaScript, right? Take it from React, Angular to anything. In the end, it compiles to a JavaScript project. And to make developer experience more easy and to make switching easy, we do use JavaScript. Okay, so till now I guess we are very much clear. If you guys have any questions, you can ask whenever you want to. Okay, so we are now very much clear that why JavaScript was brought into some different environment called as Node.js, because we wanted to have some server rendered APIs. We wanted to use JavaScript to have some computations in the backend, because JavaScript is a very potent language when it comes to IO operations. So IO means input and output. I would also come back to it in the meanwhile. Okay, so JavaScript on server, what exactly it is? So it basically provides the perfect conditions for using Node.js as a web server. We can use JavaScript on the server side of the web development, and we can build fast, highly and scalable network in the backends. Okay. Now, first, why Node.js? So we have some pros. We also have some cons, but I guess I got only one con out of it. There are multiple more cons, but to our use case on a beginner level as a student, we can only have these of the cons at place. Okay. So yeah. So first is the single threaded based event. So yeah, this brings me to the next topic of the threads. Okay, so whenever I say threads, it's basically, I guess it demands a very basic knowledge about operating systems as a whole. So let's say we have a code and it wants to be executed in some processor. Okay, so how would it take place? Now let's say I have some processor sitting right here. Just a second, yeah. Now it can have multiple approaches, but JavaScript has a single thread. Whenever I say a single thread, it basically is type of a queue to the processor. Okay, so any code which wants to be executed, let's say I have a file f1. Now it wants to be executed. It would go through this pipe, or it would go through this queue to the processor, and every other file, let's say if we have multiple copies of f1 only, this would queue up right there. Okay, and this queue is basically called as the thread. So thread is basically kind of a sub process to a larger process, because this CPU has some cores in it. These cores are responsible to handle each and every logical function out there in the PC. So these threads basically provide a pathway to these cores. Okay, so there's someone in the meeting. Yeah, cool. So these threads basically provide a pathway to the cores to be executed one after the other. So and these threads, some different languages, we have Java, we have C++, they have multi-threaded nature, but JavaScript was built on the philosophy of being a single-threaded nature. But now we would also look on to the fact that yes, JavaScript is single-threaded, but we can use JavaScript as a multi-threaded purpose also. You might be hearing something called as pseudo threads, which JavaScript or Node.js as a whole has. But yeah, because Node.js has something called as LibUV in place, which is also made by C++. We would look into it in the coming slides. So I guess now the single threaded nature is quite clear from your side, that whenever a process comes for the JavaScript to execute, it goes through a particular pipe, or it goes through a particular queue to the processor to be executed. So whenever we have multiple processes coming into picture, we would be having a queue kind of structure.